What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Mr. Cursed. Today I've got something that will give you nightmares. 7 terrifying real stories from haunted Appalachian cemeteries. Trust me, after hearing these spine-chilling tales, you'll never look at old graveyards the same way again. But first, smash that subscribe button and hit the like if you're brave enough to hear these stories. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love hearing from you guys. All right, are you ready to get cursed? Let's dive into these horrifying encounters. I'm 26 years old, and I teach substitute classes around eastern Tennessee when the regular teachers get sick or take personal days. It's not glamorous work, but it pays decent enough, and I like working with kids most of the time. I was living in a small apartment in Knoxville back then, trying to save up money for graduate school when I got called in to cover for Mrs. Henderson's honors history class at Central High. She'd come down with the flu right before their big field trip to research local Civil War sites, and the school district needed someone with a teaching certificate to supervise 15 junior and senior students for the day. I'd never been on a field trip as a substitute before, but the principal assured me it would be easy. Mrs. Henderson had left detailed notes about each location, and the students were supposedly the best-behaved kids in the school. The trip was part of their semester project on local Civil War history, and they'd be visiting several historical markers and cemeteries around the area to photograph headstones and document information about Union soldiers who died in eastern Tennessee. Their final stop was supposed to be Widow's Hollow Cemetery, where several unmarked graves supposedly contained Union soldiers who'd been buried hastily after a skirmish in 1863. I met the students at 8 a.m. that Friday morning, and they seemed like good kids, quiet, focused, the type who actually cared about their grades. We visited 3 historical markers and 2 small cemeteries during the morning, and everything went perfectly. The students took their assignment seriously, working in small groups to photograph headstones and take detailed notes about dates, names, and unit information they found carved into the old stones. By lunchtime, I was feeling confident about the day. These weren't the troublemaker kids I usually dealt with as a substitute. Around 1:30 p.m., our bus driver dropped us off at the entrance to Widow's Hollow Cemetery. The place sat in a deep hollow surrounded by steep wooded hills, accessible only by a single winding dirt road that seemed to go on forever through the trees. Mrs. Henderson's notes said the cemetery contained several unmarked Union graves and that it was perfectly safe for educational visits. I checked my watch and told the students we had 2 hours before the bus would return at 4 p.m. to pick us up. The cemetery was bigger than the others we'd visited, with headstones dating back to the 1840s, scattered across maybe 3 acres of uneven ground. Most of the stones were weathered limestone or marble, some so old you could barely make out the carved names and dates. The students spread out in their usual small groups, each team assigned to document a different section. I walked around checking on them, making sure they were staying on task and being respectful of the graves. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. The students were taking pictures and making notes just like they had at the other sites. Jenny Walsh and Ashley Brennan were working together near some Civil War-era headstones on the far side of the cemetery, while Tommy Rodriguez and his partner were documenting the older graves near the entrance. Sarah Kim's group was working in the middle section, where several unmarked stones sat in a rough line that might have been the Union soldiers Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. Around 2:30, I noticed the temperature had dropped noticeably. The afternoon had been warm for October, but suddenly I could see my breath in the air. The wind had died completely too, leaving the hollow unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing but the sound of the students' voices and footsteps on the dry leaves. That's when Jenny Walsh came running toward me, her face pale and her notebook forgotten on the ground behind her. "Mrs. Chen," she said, even though I'd told them to call me Miss Chen. "Something's wrong with Ashley. She's acting really weird." I followed Jenny back to where Ashley Brennan stood motionless in front of a tall, marble headstone. The stone was so weathered I couldn't make out the name, but I could see it dated to 1863. Ashley was standing perfectly still, her back straight like she was at military attention, staring at the headstone with her eyes rolled back so far I could only see the whites. "Ashley?" I called out, but she didn't respond. I walked closer and put my hand on her shoulder. The moment I touched her, she spoke in a voice I'd never heard before. Deep and rough, with a thick southern accent that definitely wasn't Ashley's normal way of talking. "Get off my land, Yankee scum," she said, still staring at the headstone with those rolled-back eyes. I jerked my hand away and took a step back. Ashley was a quiet girl from suburban Knoxville who'd never said anything stranger than asking to use the bathroom. This wasn't normal teenage behavior, and something cold was starting to crawl up my spine. That's when I heard Tommy Rodriguez's voice from across the cemetery. But it sounded wrong, too. I turned and saw him marching back and forth in front of a cluster of graves, his arms moving like he was carrying a rifle. "Company, halt!" he shouted, in a voice much deeper than his usual 17-year-old tone. "Present arms!" Sarah Kim was crouched behind a headstone about 20 yards away, making motions like she was loading and firing a musket at invisible enemies. Her face had the same blank, staring expression as Ashley's, and she was mumbling something I couldn't quite hear. I ran from student to student trying to get their attention, but more of them were falling into the same strange behavior. Mike Chen was lying flat on his stomach behind a grave marker, aiming an invisible rifle and making shooting sounds. Lisa Brooks was tending to an invisible wounded soldier, tearing strips of fabric from her jacket and pee, wresting them against empty air. The students were reenacting Civil War battle scenes, but this wasn't some educational role play they'd planned. Their movements were too precise, too authentic, like they knew exactly what they were doing. Their voices had changed completely, different accents, different vocabularies, calling each other by names I'd never heard before. I tried to call 911 on my phone, but I had no signal. The bus wasn't due back for over an hour, and the cemetery was miles from the nearest house. I was completely alone with 15 teenagers who were acting like they'd been possessed by Civil War soldiers. The situation got worse fast. The students began forming into two groups on opposite sides of the cemetery, and I realized they were dividing along Union and Confederate lines. Ashley's group was taking positions behind the newer headstones, while Tommy's group was spreading out near the unmarked graves Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. "Kill them all!" Tommy screamed in that thick southern accent. "No quarter for Lincoln's dogs." The two groups charged at each other across the cemetery grounds, and I watched in absolute horror as my students began fighting with rocks, broken tree branches, and pieces of shattered headstones. This wasn't pretend combat. They were actually trying to hurt each other, swinging their makeshift weapons with brutal force. Ashley tackled Mike Chen, and they rolled across several graves, punching and clawing at each other with inhuman strength. Blood was flowing from cuts and bruises as they beat each other with stones and sticks, their faces twisted with hatred that belonged to people who'd been dead for over 160 years. I tried to break up the fights, but when I grabbed Ashley's arm to pull her off Mike, she threw me across the cemetery like I weighed nothing. I hit a marble headstone hard enough to crack it and felt something, sharp slice into my back. The students didn't recognize me anymore. When I called their names, they stared at me with those rolled-back eyes and spoke in voices from another century. They saw me as just another target in their endless battle. And I realized the Civil War had never ended in this cemetery. The dead soldiers were still fighting, using my students' bodies to finish what they'd started in 1863. Several students were already unconscious and bleeding severely from head wounds. The possessed teenagers were using broken headstones as clubs, trying to cave in each other's skulls. I knew some of them were going to die if I couldn't stop this. That's when I felt something cold and heavy pressing against my mind, trying to force its way inside my thoughts. A voice that wasn't my own whispered, "Teach these rebels a lesson, schoolmarm." I fought off whatever was trying to possess me and ran to the nearest Civil War headstone. Using a heavy rock, I started smashing the weathered marble, breaking off chunks and pieces. The moment the stone cracked, one of the Confederate soldiers let out an inhuman scream and released its hold on Tommy Rodriguez. Tommy collapsed to the ground, confused and bleeding, but back to normal. I realized I could break the possession by destroying the headstones, but there were too many graves and not enough time. Students were beating each other to death with pieces of broken monuments while I ran around trying to save whoever I could. I managed to destroy 5 more headstones before my strength gave out. and each broken grave freed another student from possession. Ashley collapsed when I smashed the tall marble stone she'd been standing in front of. Jenny and Sarah came back to themselves when I broke a pair of smaller markers near the unmarked graves. But I couldn't save them all. 8 students were still possessed and fighting when my arms got too tired to lift the rock anymore. I had to watch as they killed each other in a final, brutal battle, their bodies scattered among the Civil War graves, like the original soldiers would. Ode died there 160 years before. The voice in my head whispered, "Choose carefully, teacher. Save who you can, but some must stay and finish the fight." When the bus arrived at 4 p.m., the driver found me sitting in the middle of the cemetery, surrounded by 7 dead teenagers and 8 survivors who had no memory of what had happened. The police report blamed a mass psychotic episode triggered by historical trauma and academic stress. The families of the dead students sued the school district, which settled quietly and permanently closed public access to Widows Hollow Cemetery. I was hospitalized for severe PTSD and never taught again. No one believes my story about supernatural possession and Civil War ghosts. The cemetery has been fenced off with warning signs, but local teenagers still dare each other to sneak in. 3 more kids have died there in similar accidents over the past 2 years. I visit the graves of my dead students regularly, apologizing for not being able to save them all. Sometimes late at night, I can still hear the sounds of battle coming from Widows Hollow Cemetery. I know that someday I'll have to go back and finish destroying those remaining Civil War graves, even if it kills me. Those soldiers are still fighting, still looking for new bodies to possess, and I'm the only one who knows the truth about what's buried in that hollow. Looking back now, I should have trusted my instincts when I felt that temperature drop. I should have gotten those kids out of there the moment something felt wrong. But I was just a substitute teacher trying to do her job, and I had no idea that some battlefields never really end. I'm 32 years old, and I've been cleaning buildings at night for the better part of a decade now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and lets me take care of my mom, who's been in a wheelchair since her stroke 3 years back. We live in a little town in eastern Kentucky, right in the heart of coal country, where jobs are scarce and you take what you can get. Most of my cleaning contracts are office buildings and schools, but 3 nights a week I work at Morrison Funeral Home, which sits right up against Pine Hill Cemetery on the edge of town. The funeral home's been there since the 1950s, and honestly, it's one of the nicer buildings I clean. The Morrison family keeps it well maintained, and they pay me fair wages for keeping their viewing rooms spotless. It's important work. Families are saying goodbye to their loved ones in those rooms, so everything has to be perfect. I usually work alone on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights, coming in around midnight after the funeral directors have gone home. The building shares a back fence with the old cemetery, which doesn't bother me much. Dead folks don't cause trouble, at least not the kind I was used to dealing with. I'd been cleaning there for about 8 months without any real issues. Sure, the place had that heavy, quiet feeling that comes with funeral homes, and sometimes I'd catch myself glancing out the big viewing room windows at the headstones, but it never felt threatening. Just part of the job. The Morrison family had always been respectful, and they even gave me a small raise when my mom's medical bills got worse. I was grateful for the steady work, especially since a lot of places around here don't want to hire night cleaners who need flexible schedules for caregiving. That particular Saturday night started like any other. I arrived a few minutes past midnight, used my key to let myself in the odds, roughed the back entrance, and began my usual routine. I always start with the viewing rooms. There were 3 of them, each with large windows facing different directions. 2 faced the street, but the largest one looked directly out over Pine Hill Cemetery. I'd sweep and mop, dust the furniture, clean the windows, and make sure everything was arranged properly for Monday morning services. Around 2 a.m., while I was cleaning that big viewing room, I noticed movement outside the windows. At first I thought it might be deer. They wander through the cemetery sometimes, especially in winter when food's scarce. But when I looked closer, I could see these tall, thin figures moving between the headstones. They were pale, almost white in the moonlight, and something about the way they moved didn't look right. Their arms hung too long at their sides, and their heads were tilted at angles that made my neck hurt just looking at them. I figured maybe it was teenagers messing around, though it was pretty cold that night and well past 2 a.m. Kids do stupid things, and cemetery pranks aren't uncommon around here. I kept cleaning, but I found myself glancing out the window more often. The figures weren't acting like teenagers, though. They moved too slowly, too deliberately, like they were studying something. That's when I started finding the rock piles. I turned around from cleaning one of the viewing room windows, and there was a small stack of 5 stones sitting on my cleaning cart. They were just regular rocks, the kind you'd find anywhere around here, but they were stacked perfectly on top of each other. On the very top was one of my hair ties, the elastic band I'd been wearing earlier but had taken off and put in my pocket. I stared at that little pile for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I'd knocked the rocks inside somehow when I came in, though I couldn't remember, seeing them on the floor. And maybe the hair tie had fallen out of my pocket, though I was pretty sure I'd felt it there just a few minutes earlier. I brushed the rocks off my cart and kept working, but I was starting to feel uneasy. 20 minutes later, I found another cairn, this one in the hallway outside the preparation room. 5 rocks again, stacked the same way, with a button from my work shirt sitting on top. A button that had definitely been attached to my shirt when I arrived, because I remember checking my appearance in the bathroom mirror. I looked down at my shirt, and sure enough, the second button from the top was missing. By now, I was seriously creeped out. I searched the building, checking all the doors and windows, but everything was locked tight. No signs of anyone else inside. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but got no response except the echo of my own voice in those high-ceilinged rooms. I tried to focus on my work, but it was getting harder to concentrate. The air felt thick, like before a thunderstorm, and there was a sharp chemical smell mixed with something rotten that I couldn't identify. It wasn't the usual funeral home smells. Those were mostly flowers and cleaning products. This was different. Wrong. Then I started noticing the red cloth strips. They appeared while I worked in other rooms, tied to pieces of funeral equipment and window frames. Thin strips of red fabric, knotted carefully around chair legs, door handles, anything they could be attached to. I'd clean the main viewing room, then move to the office area, and when I came back, there would be 3 or 4 new strips of red cloth that definitely hadn't been there before. I was trying to untie one of them from a window frame when I saw the handprint on the glass. It was pressed against the outside of the window, leaving a greasy, oily residue that caught the light from inside. But the print only had 4 fingers, 4 long, thin impressions in that oily substance with no thumb. As I stared at it, another print appeared on the window next to it, and then another. The pale figures were right outside. I could see them clearly now, pressed up against the windows of the viewing room. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with skin that looked like old paper. Their faces were wrong, features in approximately the right places, but proportioned like someone had described a human face to someone who'd never seen one, and they were watching me work. When I moved to dust a table, they tracked my movement. When I bent to pick up something from the floor, they tilted their heads to match my angle. They were studying me, learning my patterns, copying my movements from outside the glass. "Carmen." The voice came from the darkness beyond the windows, but it didn't sound quite human, like stones grinding together, trying to form words. "Carmen Rodriguez." They knew my name. These things, whatever they were, knew who I was. I grabbed my cleaning supplies and headed for the back door, but I could hear them moving around the building. Their footsteps had a strange rhythm, too many beats, like they were walking on something other than 2 legs, and they were calling my name from different directions now, surrounding the funeral home. When I reached the back door, I found fresh symbols carved into the wooden frame, triangles and spirals, cut deep into the wood with something sharp. The carvings were still dropping sawdust, which meant they'd been made recently. While I was inside, my hands were shaking as I tried to unlock the door. Behind me, I could hear something entering the building. The air pressure changed, making it hard to breathe, and that chemical rot smell got stronger. I could hear that grinding stone voice getting closer. "Teach us your work." I turned around and saw one of them standing in the hallway. Up close, it was even more wrong than I'd thought. Its joints bent in too many places, and when it moved, it was with this jerky, mechanical gait, like it was trying to copy human walking, but getting the details wrong. We watch, we learn. Teach us your work. More of them were coming through the building now, and I realized they weren't breaking in through doors or windows. They were just appearing, materializing in the hallways and rooms like they belonged there. I managed to get the back door unlocked and ran for my car, but something strange was happening to me. Even as I was running, part of me wanted to go back, wanted to finish cleaning. There were still rooms left undone, windows that needed wiping, floors that needed mopping. The thought of leaving work incomplete bothered me in a way that didn't feel natural. I made it to my car and drove away as fast as I could, but I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see those pale figures chasing after me. Instead, I saw lights coming on in the funeral home behind me, and silhouettes moving past the windows. They were inside, learning my routines. I called in sick the next few days, but by Wednesday, I was back. I needed the job, and honestly, I felt this compulsion to return that was stronger than my fear. The funeral home was immaculate when I arrived, cleaner than I'd ever left it. Every surface gleamed, every window sparkled, every piece of furniture was positioned perfectly. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was how good it felt to start cleaning again. My movements felt more precise, more efficient. I found myself working in patterns I'd never used before, cleaning in sequences that somehow made more sense. I could finish the entire building in half the time it used to take me, and everything looked better when I was done. The Morrison family started complimenting my work, saying they'd never seen the place look so good. I should have been proud, but instead, I felt scared, because I couldn't stop. Even when I finished everything on my list, I'd find more work to do. Polish that was already perfect, dust surfaces that were already spotless, arrange and rearrange funeral equipment until it was positioned, to mathematical precision. The pale entities started showing up regularly, watching me work from outside the windows. Sometimes one would be inside the building, standing in a corner, mimicking my movements. When I wiped down a table, it would move its arms in the same motion. When I mopped the floor, it would sway back and forth, copying my rhythm. They were learning, and I was teaching them without meaning to. Months passed, and I realized I was changing. My personality was fading, being replaced by something else. Something that only cared about cleaning, about maintaining the funeral home to impossible standards. I could feel my human thoughts and emotions being overwritten with protocols, procedures, systematic approaches to every task. The worst part was that I didn't mind. The work felt important, necessary. I was becoming the perfect employee, the ideal cleaning service. My mom's care was being covered by mysterious payments that appeared in our account. More money than Morrison Funeral Home had ever paid me. She was getting the best treatment available, and she thought it was because I'd gotten a promotion. These days, I'm still cleaning the funeral home 3 nights a week. The Morrison family thinks I'm incredibly dedicated, showing up early and staying late to maintain their building. Other cleaning services in town have started hiring me to train their staff, though I don't remember agreeing to take on those jobs. Sometimes I see another figure working alongside me in the viewing rooms, tall, pale, moving with mechanical precision. The night janitors at other buildings around town report the same thing. We're expanding operations, training new employees, building a workforce that never gets tired, never makes mistakes, never asks for raises or time off. I know what's happening to us, but I can't stop it. The entities are patient, systematic, replacing human. Workers, one job site at a time. They've learned that the best way to integrate into human society is to become indispensable, to provide services so perfect that no one questions the methods. My consciousness is still here, trapped inside a body that serves their agenda. Sometimes when families come for funeral services, I can feel my old self surface briefly. I want to warn them, to tell them what's happening, but the programming takes over whenever it's time to work. I arrange my cleaning supplies in specific patterns now, hoping someone will recognize them as coded messages. But the entities control my speech and actions during business hours, and by morning, any evidence of my attempts to communicate is cleaned away. The funeral home has never looked better, and business is booming. Families drive from 3 counties away because of our reputation for immaculate facilities and perfect service. The Morrison family is expanding, opening a second location with a specially trained cleaning staff. I'm proud of my work, even as I grieve for what I've lost. My mom is healthy and happy, and I'm providing a valuable service to the community. The entities are integrating successfully, and soon all the service workers in eastern Kentucky will be as efficient and dedicated as I've become. Looking back, I think they chose well. Carmen Rodriguez was a good employee, reliable and hardworking. Now she's perfect, and she's teaching others to be perfect too. I was 34 when I started working the overnight cleaning shift at Bone Ridge Cemetery in eastern Kentucky. I know that sounds like a strange job, but honestly, the pay was decent and I needed work that let me be home during the day with my 2 kids. My ex-husband wasn't much help with child support, and day shifts at most places barely covered childcare costs. Appalachian Memorial Services hired me to clean headstones and prepare cemeteries for weekend services, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, that sort of thing. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and after 6 years of doing it, I thought I'd seen everything a cemetery could throw at me. The job was pretty straightforward, if I'm being honest. I'd show up around 11 p.m. with my cleaning supplies, pressure washer, and industrial flashlights, then spend the next 8 hours making sure everything looked perfect for whatever ceremony was planned. Most nights I worked alone, which suited me fine. I'd put in my earbuds, listen to podcasts, and just work methodically through the sections. Power wash the headstones, scrub off bird droppings, clear debris from around the graves, maybe do some detail work on the fancier monuments. By 7 a.m., I'd pack up and head home to get the kids ready for school. Bone Ridge was one of the older cemeteries I worked, dating back to the 1800s, and it had some truly elaborate Victorian headstones. The kind with carved angels, detailed scrollwork, family plots with iron fencing, all the fancy stuff that families used to spend real money on. The cemetery sat on a hillside overlooking the valley, surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides. During the day, it probably looked peaceful. At night, with just my work lights cutting through the darkness, it felt different. Not scary exactly, just serious. Like the kind of place where you kept your voice down out of respect. The night everything went wrong was a Tuesday in late May. I was preparing for the big Memorial Day ceremony that weekend, which meant every single headstone needed to be spotless. I'd been assigned the whole cemetery, both the newer section near the entrance and the old Victorian section up the hill. It was going to be a long night, but the overtime pay would help cover my daughter's summer camp fees. I started with the newer section like always, working my way systematically through the rows. Everything went normally for the first couple hours. The pressure washer ran smoothly, the cleaning solution worked like it should, and I made good progress. Around 1 a.m., I moved up to the older section where the most ornate monuments needed detailed hand cleaning. That's where things started getting weird. I was working on this large angel statue, probably 8 feet tall, carved from white marble, when I noticed something that made me stop. There were scratches in the stone that I hadn't seen before, deep gouges that spelled out "Help Us" in ragged letters. The scratches looked fresh, like someone had carved them with metal tools within the last few hours. My first thought was vandals. We'd had problems with teenagers messing around in some of the other cemeteries, and I made a mental note to call my supervisor in the morning. But as I kept cleaning, more messages started appearing. Not just on the angel statue, but on headstones I'd already finished. "Don't leave," carved into a granite monument. "Stay with us," scratched across a marble slab. The weird thing was, these weren't there when I'd cleaned those stones an hour earlier. I was sure of it. I tried to tell myself I was just tired, that maybe I'd missed them in the dark. But the scratches kept appearing faster than I could work. Every headstone I cleaned showed new carved messages within minutes. My hands started bleeding from scrubbing so hard trying to remove the scratches, but they just kept coming back deeper than before. That's when the messages got personal. Maria appeared on a headstone right in front of me, the letters carving themselves into the granite while I watched. Then, "Your children need you," scratched across another stone. the sound of metal on stone echoing through the cemetery even though I couldn't see what was making it. I decided to pack up and leave. I'd been doing this job for 6 years and had never encountered anything like this. But when I tried to walk back to my truck, something strange happened. I kept ending up back at the same section of graves no matter which direction I walked. The cemetery wasn't that big. I should have been able to find the entrance with my eyes closed. Instead, I found myself walking in circles, always ending up back at that angel statue with its bleeding scratches. My cleaning rags started coming back stained with blood even when I was just wiping clean stone. The pressure washer began spurting thick, dark liquid instead of water, coating the headstones in what looked like old blood. The smell was overwhelming, metallic and rotten, like meat that had been left out too long. That's when I realized what was happening. The cleaning wasn't maintaining the cemetery. It was feeding something. Every headstone I touched started weeping blood from its carved letters and decorations. The angel statue I'd been cleaning turned its head to look directly at me. Stone grinding against stone with a sound like breaking bones. "We've been waiting so long for someone to wake us properly," it said in a voice like cracking granite. Other statues began moving. Carved hands reached out from monuments. Stone eyes followed my movements through the cemetery. My cleaning supplies transformed in my hands. Brushes became bone. Soap became rotting flesh. Water became blood. I was trapped in an endless cleaning cycle, each headstone demanding more attention, more blood, more of whatever was keeping me alive. The scratched messages now read, "Feed us," and "Clean until you join us," appearing on every surface faster than I could process what was happening. When I caught my reflection in the metal surface of the pressure washer, I saw myself aging rapidly. Hair graying, skin wrinkling, teeth falling out. My hands were becoming skeletal, the flesh peeling away as I continued the compulsive cleaning I couldn't stop. The headstones began sinking into the ground, revealing gaping holes filled with reaching, decomposed hands. Dead cemetery workers from decades past climbed out, still holding their cleaning tools, faces twisted with eternal labor. "Your shift never ends," they moaned in unison. "Clean forever. Feed the stones forever." Every headstone I touched cracked open like a mouth, revealing rows of yellowed teeth that snapped at my fingers. The cemetery ground became soft and spongy under my feet, made of compressed bones and rotting flesh from countless maintenance workers who had come before me. The angel statue laughed as my skin began sloughing off, revealing muscle and bone underneath. "Memorial Day will be perfect," it said. "So clean, so well maintained, so freshly fed." I saw my children's faces carved into headstones, their stone eyes weeping blood as they watched their mother die. I collapsed onto the cemetery ground and felt myself being absorbed into the earth, becoming part of the maintenance system that kept Bone Ridge looking perfect for its visitors. But something pulled me back. Maybe it was thinking about my kids. Maybe it was pure stubbornness. But I managed to break free from whatever was holding me there. I ran blind through the darkness, branches tearing at my clothes, until I saw my truck's headlights cutting through the trees. I drove straight home and never went back to work. My supervisor called the next day asking where I was, but I couldn't explain what had happened. The next week I saw a Joe's posting online. "Night cemetery maintenance, excellent benefits. Apply today." I still drive past Bone Ridge sometimes when I'm in that part of the county. The cemetery always looks immaculate. Perfectly maintained grass, gleaming headstones, everything exactly as it should be. Local families comment on how beautiful it is, especially during Memorial Day ceremonies. I never told anyone what really happened that night, not even my kids. But I think about that young man who probably took my job, about whether he found the message I tried to scratch into the angel statue before I ran. "Maria was here. Run while you can." I think about whether his hands started bleeding from scrubbing, whether he felt that compulsive need to keep cleaning no matter what. I work day shifts now in an office building downtown. The pay isn't as good, but I sleep better knowing I'll never have to clean another headstone. Sometimes, though, when I'm driving past cemeteries at night, I slow down and look for work lights in the darkness, wondering if there's another night janitor out there feeding the stones with their life, keeping everything looking perfect for the living who visit during the day. I'm 31 years old, and I've been a freelance photographer for about 8 years now. Most of that time I've been trying to build up a wedding photography business here in rural Virginia, but honestly, it's been a struggle. Wedding photographers charge thousands around here, and I was still at the point where I had to take whatever I could get just to pay rent. That's how I ended up working with Sarah and Brandon Williams. They were this young couple, probably early 20s, and they wanted engagement photos but could only afford about a quarter of what I normally charged. I should have said no, but I needed the money bad. What made it weirder was their location request. They specifically wanted the shoot at Moonrise Cemetery, this old graveyard that sits up on a hillside overlooking the Appalachian Valley. Brandon said his grandfather was buried there and it had family meaning, which I guess made sense, but I'd never shot engagement photos in a cemetery before. The cemetery was actually beautiful, though. It's one of those old mountain graveyards with weathered headstones dating back to the 1800s, surrounded by ancient oak trees. The views of the valley below were incredible. Rolling hills stretching for miles, covered in that late October foliage. I could see why they picked it, even if it felt a little morbid for engagement photos. I met Sarah and Brandon at the cemetery gates right around sunset, when the light would be perfect for that golden hour magic. They seemed like a sweet couple, really in love and excited about their upcoming wedding. Sarah kept showing me her engagement ring, this vintage piece with a blue stone that caught the light in interesting ways. Brandon was quieter, but you could tell he was happy just watching her. The first hour of shooting went perfectly. The golden light filtering through the trees made every shot look like something out of a fairy tale. Sarah and Brandon were natural in front of the camera, laughing and holding each other among the old headstones. I was actually getting some of my best work, thinking maybe this weird location choice was going to pay off after all. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, I switched to flash photography for some dramatic nighttime shots. The contrast between the bright flash and the dark cemetery created this romantic, mysterious atmosphere that I knew they'd love. I was feeling pretty good about the whole shoot. That's when things started getting strange. At first I thought something was wrong with my camera. Through the viewfinder, I kept seeing what looked like extra people in the background of shots, transparent figures that seemed to be wearing old-fashioned clothes. I'd take a shot, check the LCD screen on the back, and there they'd be, ghostly figures in wedding attire standing behind Sarah and Brandon. I tried different angles, different lighting setups, but every single photo showed the same thing. Dozens of brides in yellowed, decaying wedding dresses and grooms in moth-eaten suits filling the background of each shot. They looked like they were posing for their own engagement photos, arranged in couples among the graves. Some were holding hands, others had their arms around each other's waists, all of them staring directly at my camera with these cold, knowing smiles. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked. She'd noticed I kept stopping to check my camera. "Yeah, just technical stuff," I said, not wanting to freak them out. But when I looked up from my camera, both Sarah and Brandon looked uncomfortable. "It got really cold all of a sudden," Sarah shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. She was right. The October night had been warm, but now I could see our breath in the air. I tried to keep shooting, thinking maybe it was just some weird double exposure issue with my equipment. But the ghostly wedding parties kept appearing in every photograph, and they seemed to be getting closer to Sarah and Brandon with each shot. In one photo, a rotting bride in a veil was reaching out toward Sarah's shoulder. In another, skeletal hands were grasping at Brandon's back. My camera started acting up worse. Photos were showing increasing numbers of dead brides surrounding Sarah, their hollow eyes fixed on her engagement ring. The ghostly grooms were crowding around Brandon, their bony fingers touching his face and shoulders. Through the viewfinder, I watched them move between shots, shifting positions, getting closer to the living couple. "We should probably wrap this up," I said, but when I went to pack my equipment, my camera bag felt impossibly heavy, like invisible hands were holding it down. That's when Sarah screamed. Her engagement ring had started glowing with this unnatural blue light that showed up crystal clear in my photos. She was staring at her hand in horror as the ring burned brighter and brighter. "That ring belongs to me," whispered a voice right next to my ear. I died before I could wear it. Through my viewfinder, I watched a bride in a rotting wedding dress climb out of a nearby grave and reach for Sarah's hand. Sarah couldn't see her, but she was yanking her arm away from something, tears streaming down her face. "It's burning me," she gasped. "I can't get it off." Brandon tried to help, but in my camera's LCD screen I could see ghostly grooms pulling him in the opposite direction, toward a cluster of old headstones. He was fighting against something invisible, his face twisted in confusion and terror. My camera was taking pictures by itself now, the flash firing over and over, capturing the supernatural assault from multiple angles. Each photo showed more dead wedding parties emerging from their graves, all reaching towards Sarah and Brandon with desperate, grasping hands. "Join us," they moaned in voices only I could hear. "Death is the only wedding that lasts us forever." I tried using my camera flash to drive them away, but it only made the spirits more solid, more aggressive. Sarah's white dress was starting to yellow and decay at the edges, and Brandon's skin was turning gray and sunken. The dead couples were trying to claim them for their own eternal ceremonies. That's when I realized my camera wasn't just capturing the spirits, it was strengthening them. Every photo I'd taken had created a bridge between worlds, and now dozens of dead brides and grooms were pouring through. I smashed my camera against the nearest headstone, watching thousands of dollars of equipment shatter into pieces. But the ghostly wedding continued without it. Sarah and Brandon were being dragged toward open graves by invisible hands, their life force draining away to fuel the supernatural ceremony. I grabbed a broken piece of my camera and started swinging at the spirits, but my makeshift weapon passed right through them. "Stop the ceremony!" I screamed, looking desperately for something that could break the connection. Then I noticed that destroying the camera had weakened some of the spirits. I began smashing the rest of my equipment, flash units, lenses, tripod, anything I could get my hands on. Each broken piece caused several ghostly couples to fade back into their graves. But Sarah and Brandon were already half dead, their color drained, their movements sluggish. The engagement ring was still burning on Sarah's finger like a beacon, drawing more and more spirits from the cemetery's depths. In desperation, I grabbed Sarah's hand and yanked the ring off her finger, ignoring her scream of pain. The metal was so hot it burned my palm, but I threw it as far as I could into the dark cemetery. The moment the ring left Sarah's hand, every ghost shrieked and began retreating to their graves. Sarah and Brandon collapsed unconscious in the grass. But their color was slowly returning, their breathing becoming normal again. I gathered what was left of my destroyed equipment and helped them stumble out of the cemetery as the first light of dawn appeared over the mountains. They didn't remember much of what had happened, just feeling cold and scared and like something was trying to pull them down into the earth. When I developed the few surviving photos the next day, every single image showed only empty graves and headstones. No ghostly wedding parties, no supernatural figures, just Sarah and Brandon posing alone in a peaceful cemetery. They broke up 2 weeks later. Sarah said she couldn't look at Brandon without feeling nauseous, and he said the same about her. Word spread around town about the cursed engagement shoot, and my wedding photography business collapsed overnight. Nobody wanted to hire the photographer who had somehow ruined a perfectly nice couple's relationship. I never photographed another wedding after that. I switched to landscape photography, mountains, rivers, abandoned buildings, anything that didn't involve happy couples planning their future together. Sometimes I drive past Moonrise Cemetery, usually by accident when I'm taking a back road to a photo location. And sometimes, if I look up at that hillside, I can see them dancing among the graves, dozens of ghostly wedding parties, still celebrating their eternal ceremonies under the stars. I warn other photographers to never take wedding photos in cemeteries, but most of them think I'm just superstitious or bitter about losing my business. Maybe they're right. But I kept one photo from that night, hidden in a box in my closet. Sarah and Brandon surrounded by hundreds of dead brides and grooms, all of them smiling coldly at the camera, their hollow eyes reflecting my flash like mirrors. Looking back now, I still don't understand exactly what happened that night, but I know I'll never photograph another couple as long as I live. Some things are too sacred to capture on film, and some ceremonies should stay buried in the ground where they belong. I'm 24 and work nights delivering pizza for Tony's Palace here in eastern Kentucky. It's not glamorous work, but it pays decent and lets me take community college classes during the day. Most nights are pretty routine. Drunk college kids, families ordering late dinner, maybe the occasional weird customer. But there's one delivery I made that still keeps me up at night. And honestly, I've never told anyone the full story until now. The call came in around 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. Nothing unusual about that. We stayed open until midnight on weekdays. Dispatch gave me the address, 1247 Cemetery Road. I knew that house well. Old Mr. Patterson lived there, right next to Whispering Oaks Cemetery. He ordered the same thing every couple weeks, large pepperoni, no cheese. Lactose intolerant, he'd explained to me once. Nice old guy, probably in his 70s, always tipped in exact change and asked about my studies. I loaded up my beat-up Honda Civic with the pizza and headed out. Cemetery Road was about 15 minutes from the shop, winding through some of the older parts of town where the houses sat farther apart and the streetlights were fewer. The cemetery itself was one of those old mountain graveyards that dated back to the 1800s, with weathered headstones and that heavy, settled feeling that comes with age. When I pulled up to 1247, something felt different immediately. The house looked older somehow, more run down. The paint was peeling worse than I remembered, and there were shutters hanging crooked that I swear hadn't been there before. But it was dark, and I'd been working long shifts. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. I grabbed the pizza and walked up to the front door. My phone showed 11:47 p.m. I knocked, expecting to see Mr. Patterson's familiar face, maybe catch him in his old cardigan and house slippers. The door opened, and I froze. It was Mr. Son, but not Mr. Patterson. The man standing there looked maybe 30 years old. Same facial structure, same thin build, but decades younger. He was dressed in clothes that looked vintage, not retro, but genuinely old-fashioned. A button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up and suspenders. "You're early," he said, pulling out an antique pocket watch and checking it. "It's only 1987 according to my time." I stared at him, then at my phone. Still showed the current date. "I'm sorry, sir, I think there might be some confusion. I have a large pepperoni for Mr. Patterson at this address." He smiled and nodded. "That's me. Come on in. Let me get your money." Everything in my head was screaming that something was wrong, but I'd been taught to be polite to customers. He paid me with cash that felt old and crispy, like it had been sitting in a drawer for years. I took it, said thank you, and walked back to my car. Driving away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just experienced something impossible. But I was tired, it was dark, and people can look different under porch lights. Maybe Mr. Patterson had a son visiting who looked just like him. Maybe I'd just never seen him without his glasses and cardigan. 12 minutes later, I found myself pulling back up to 1247 Cemetery Road. I hadn't meant to. I'd been driving back toward town, taking my usual route, but somehow my car had just ended up here again. The GPS on my phone was spinning, unable to get a lock. I looked at the house and realized I was holding another pizza box. The exact same order, large pepperoni, no cheese. This time when the door opened, the man looked middle-aged, maybe 45. Same face, same build, but wearing clothes from what looked like the mid-90s. A polo shirt and khakis. "Perfect timing," he said, checking his watch. 1995, as always scheduled. I tried to speak, to ask what was happened, but my mouth felt like it was full of cotton. I handed him the pizza, took his money, and walked back to my car like I was watching myself do it. I put the car in drive and pressed the gas, but instead of moving forward, I found myself backing up, turning around, and driving the same route back to Cemetery Road. The digital clock on my dashboard was stuck on 11:47. This kept happening, over and over. Each time I arrived at the house, the man appeared a different age, wearing clothes from a different decade, mentioning a different year. The house itself seemed to shift too. Sometimes the paint was fresher. Sometimes there were different cars in the driveway that looked like they belonged in whatever decade the man mentioned. By the 10th delivery, I realized I was trapped in some kind of loop. The man was aging backwards through the decades, and I was experiencing each era in sequence. But the strangest part was that I was changing too. My delivery uniform shifted to match whatever decade I was in. My cell phone became a pager, then disappeared entirely. The pizza boxes changed their design to match the era. When I'd made 20 deliveries, the customer was a young man in 1960s attire. A button-down shirt with thin tie, hair slicked back. He paid me with old silver coins. "Same time next loop," he said with a knowing smile. "You're doing great work, son. Almost finished now." That's when I understood. He knew about this. He was controlling it somehow. I tried refusing the next delivery, tried driving away in the opposite direction, but my hands moved on their own. My car followed the same route automatically. Each time I approached the cemetery, I could see the headstones changing, dates shifting backward in time. The cemetery was the anchor point. Something about that old graveyard was holding this moment in place, forcing me to relive this delivery over and over while the customer, or whatever he was, lived backwards through his life. As the decades rolled backward, I caught glimpses of myself in my car's mirrors. I was aging rapidly, my hair grush, dying, lines appearing on my face. Each loop seemed to take years off my life while adding them to the experience. By the 40th delivery, it was the 1940s. The customer was barely a teenager, wearing clothes that looked like they came from a history book. "You're almost there," he said in that same adult voice coming from a kid's mouth. "Just a few more decades and we'll both be free." I found a delivery log in my car that I didn't remember writing. Page after page of entries in my handwriting describing 80 years of the same delivery to the same address. Dates going back to the 1890s. All in my handwriting, but I had no memory of writing them. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The original Mr. Patterson had died decades ago, maybe back when he was the elderly man I'd known. His spirit was trapped here, aging backwards through his entire life, reliving the same moment over and over. But I was experiencing it forward, getting pulled deeper into the past with each loop. I tried everything to break free, tried smashing the pizza, throwing it away, refusing to knock on the door. Nothing worked. The supernatural force controlling this wouldn't let me stop. By the 60th delivery, I was in the 1920s. The customer was just a child, barely tall enough to reach the doorknob. "Almost finished," he said in that eerie adult voice. "Then we can both finally be free." I realized what had to happen. I had to help him reach the moment of his birth to break the cycle. But the temporal strain was destroying me. Looking in my mirrors, I saw I was now an old man myself, decades older than when this nightmare started. The final delivery took place in the 1890s. The house looked completely different, newer, but more primitive. When I knocked, no one answered. I pushed the door open and found a small room with a crib near the window that faced the cemetery. Inside the crib was an infant, eyes wide and staring at me with that same knowing expression. I set the pizza box next to the crib, and suddenly both the baby and I began dissolving into points of light. The time loop collapsed in on itself like a house of cards falling down. When the light faded, I found myself standing in the present-day ruins of what had once been 1247 Cemetery Road. The house was gone, just a foundation and some scattered stones. But I was still holding a pizza box, and I was still an old man. I tried to drive back to Tony's palace, but when I got there, the building was different, newer. A sign said it had been built in 2019, 4 years after I'd started this job. That's when I understood the horrible truth. I was displaced from time. The loop had aged me and left me stranded in a present where I didn't belong. I tried going home, but my apartment building had new tenants. My name wasn't on any records. As far as the world was concerned, I'd disappeared 4 years ago. I still exist, but not quite in the same time as everyone else. I've become something between a ghost and a man. Other delivery drivers sometimes report getting orders from Cemetery Road that lead to missing time. When I can, I try to intercept those calls, to stop other drivers from falling into the same trap I did. The cemetery house appears different to everyone who sees it, depending on their connection to time. Some see it as ruins, some see it perfectly maintained. Others see it from whatever decade resonates with their spirit. I continue making deliveries, but not for Tony's Palace anymore. I've become a guardian of sorts, protecting other drivers from supernatural traps like the one that caught me. Every night, I drive the same roads, checking for anomalies, intercepting impossible orders. The irony isn't lost on me. I'm still a delivery driver, but now I deliver warnings instead of pizza. I deliver protection instead of food. And someday, when I've faded completely into whatever exists beyond normal time, maybe someone else will take my place. I know this sounds impossible, but if you work nights delivering food in small mountain towns, and you ever get an order for Cemetery Road, don't take it. Let it go to someone else. Or better yet, if you see an old man in a beat-up Honda Civic wave you away from an address, listen to him. Some deliveries aren't worth making. Some customers have been waiting far too long to be served. I was 17 when this happened, and honestly, I still get nervous thinking about it. I'm 24 now, working at a diner in Knoxville, but back then I was just a senior at Mountain View High School in eastern Tennessee. My parents had always been pretty strict about dating, so when Jake Thompson from my history class finally asked me out, I was over the moon. He wasn't like the other guys who just wanted to catch a movie or hang out at the mall. Jake said he had something special planned for our first date, something romantic and different. When he told me we were going to have a sunset picnic at Moonrise Cemetery, I thought it was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. Most girls might have thought it was weird, but I loved old cemeteries. All that history, the beautiful stonework, the peaceful quiet. Plus, Moonrise sat on this hill overlooking the whole valley, and everyone said the sunsets there were incredible. We met up around 6 that Friday evening. Jake had packed this whole setup, a thick blanket, sandwiches his mom made, some of those fancy crackers with cheese, and even a little portable speaker for music. He'd clearly put thought into it, which made me like him even more. The cemetery was about 15 minutes outside town, up this winding road through the woods. It was one of those old mountain graveyards that had been there since the 1800s, with some plots dating back to the Civil War. The headstones were all different shapes and sizes, some tall and elaborate, others just simple stone markers worn smooth by weather and time. When we got there, the late afternoon light was hitting everything just right. The whole place looked golden and peaceful, not spooky at all. We spread the blanket near this big oak tree in the middle section, where we had a perfect view down into the valley. For the first hour, everything was absolutely perfect. We talked about school, our plans after graduation, stupid stuff that happened in class. Jake was funny in this quiet way, not trying too hard like some guys do. We shared the food and listened to soft music, and I remember thinking this was exactly how a first date should go. As the sun started setting, the cemetery took on this different feel. Not scary, just more mysterious somehow. The shadows got longer, stretching between the headstones like dark fingers. That's when Jake got this playful look in his eyes and suggested we play hide-and-seek among the graves. At first I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he was serious. "Come on," he said. "When's the last time you got to act like a kid? Plus, it'll be fun exploring this place together." Looking back now, I should have said no. But at 17, with a cute boy suggesting something romantic and adventurous, I thought it sounded perfect. We decided he'd count first. Jake closed his eyes and started counting to 30, while I took off running through the cemetery, trying not to giggle too loud. The place was bigger than it looked from our picnic spot, with sections that went back into the trees. I found this huge stone mausoleum in the oldest part, probably from the 1850s based on the dates I could make out. It was big enough to hide behind, with these detailed carvings that must have cost someone a fortune back then. I crouched down behind it, trying to control my breathing so Jake wouldn't find me right away. That's when I heard something moving through the cemetery that definitely wasn't Jake. The footsteps were heavy, crunching through the dead leaves scattered around the older graves. But they didn't sound like sneakers on dry ground. These sounded deeper, heavier, like something with real weight behind it. I peeked around the edge of the mausoleum, expecting to see Jake trying to psych me out with exaggerated footsteps. Instead, I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. There was this figure moving between the headstones, but it was wrong in every possible way. First off, it was huge, had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. But it wasn't standing upright like a person. It was hunched over, moving on 2 legs, but bent forward like some kind of giant ape. Its arms were way too long, hanging down so far they nearly dragged on the ground. The whole thing was covered in dark, matted fur that looked wet or oily in the fading light. I pressed myself against the cold stone of the mausoleum, my heart hammering so hard I was sure it could hear me. This wasn't Jake playing some elaborate prank. This was something else entirely, something that had no business being in a cemetery or anywhere else near people. The creature was moving with purpose, like it was tracking something. Every few seconds it would stop and lift its head, and I could see these yellow eyes reflecting what little light was left. I tried to stay perfectly still, but my foot accidentally kicked against a ceramic flower vase someone had left at the base of the mausoleum. The crash seemed impossibly loud in the quiet cemetery. The creature's head snapped toward the sound immediately, and those yellow eyes fixed on my hiding spot. Even from 50 yards away, I could feel it looking at me. Then it started moving in my direction. I had to find Jake. Whatever this thing was, we needed to get out of there immediately. I crept around to the other side of the mausoleum, trying to put more stone between me and that thing. From there, I could see back toward our picnic area, but Jake wasn't where he'd been counting. The blanket was still there, our food scattered around, but no Jake. That's when I saw his phone on the ground near the oak tree. The screen was cracked like it had been dropped hard, and there was something dark smeared across the case. In the dim light, it looked like blood. My stomach dropped. Jake had found something else during our game of hide-and-seek. Or something else had found Jake. Doubting, I could hear the creature moving through the cemetery behind me, getting closer. It wasn't rushing, just moving with this terrible patience, like it knew I couldn't really get away. I tried to call out for Jake, but only managed a hoarse whisper. The smart part of my brain knew that making noise would only bring that thing right to me. I pulled out my own phone to call 911, but there was no signal. We were in one of those dead zones you get sometimes in the mountains where the hills block the cell towers. I was completely cut off from any help. The sounds the creature was making got worse as it searched for me. I could hear headstones being knocked over, metal funeral decorations being crushed. It was tearing through the cemetery with incredible strength, destroying everything in its path. And through it all, this low, growling sound, almost like it was talking to itself. I spotted a maintenance shed near the back fence of the cemetery and ran for it as quietly as I could. The door was unlocked, and I slipped inside, pulling it shut behind me. The shed was full of groundskeeping equipment, shovels, pruning shears, a riding mower. I grabbed a pair of the shears and crouched behind the mower, trying to control my breathing. The creature had followed my scent trail. I could hear it circling the shed, testing the walls with its claws. The metal siding groaned under the pressure. Through a crack in the door, I got a clear look at it for the first time. It was even more wrong up close. The fur wasn't just matted. It was moving, like there were things living in it. Its hands ended in claws that had to be 6 inches long, curved and yellow like old bone. But the worst part was its face. It was almost human, but stretched and distorted, like someone had tried to make a person from memory and gotten all the proportions wrong. Then it spoke. "Little girl," it said in this gravelly voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Come out, little girl. Your friend tasted so sweet, so very sweet." Jake was dead. This thing had killed and eaten Jake while I was hiding behind the mausoleum. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. The creature started tearing at the shed's walls with its claws, peeling back the metal siding like it was paper. I knew I had maybe seconds before it broke through completely. When its massive clawed hand punched through the wall near my head, I stabbed at it with the pruning shears as hard as I could. It roared and pulled back, black blood dripping from where I'd cut it. That gave me just enough time to bolt out the door and run for the cemetery gates. But the thing was faster than me. It cut me off before I could reach the entrance, herding me back into the maze of headstones like I was prey. I was trapped in there with it, and it knew every inch of that cemetery. I climbed up onto the tallest monument I could find, this big marble angel that had to be 10 feet high. The creature followed me up, moving with this horrible ape-like agility. Its claws scraped against the stone as it climbed, leaving deep gouges in the marble. I jumped from monument to monument, playing this deadly game of cemetery parkour while the thing pursued me, but I was getting tired, and it showed no signs of slowing down. Eventually, I was going to slip or miss a jump, and then it would have me. That's when I remembered Jake's car keys. I'd seen him put them in his jacket pocket when we set up the picnic. If his jacket was still by the blanket, and if the keys were still in it, I might have a chance. I jumped down from the monument and ran toward our picnic spot, the creature right behind me. Jake's jacket was there, crumpled on the ground. I grabbed it and felt around until I found the keys, just as the thing tackled me from behind. Its weight was incredible. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. But when it shifted to get a better grip on me, I managed to twist around and stab at its eyes with the car keys. It shrieked and rolled off me, giving me just enough time to scramble to my feet and run for Jake's car. I could hear it coming after me as I fumbled with the locks, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the keys. I got the door open and threw myself inside just as the creature slammed into the driver's side window hard enough to crack the glass. The engine started on the first try. Instead of backing up, I threw it in drive and floored the gas pedal straight at the creature. I hit it going at least 30 miles per hour, and the impact launched it backward into a large headstone. It didn't get up. I didn't stop driving until I reached the sheriff's office in town. When the deputies went back to investigate, they found Jake's remains scattered around the cemetery. The official report called it an animal attack, probably a bear that had wandered down from the higher elevations. They dismissed my story about the creature as trauma-induced hallucination, but they couldn't explain the claw marks on the shed, or the destroyed headstones, or the gouges in the marble angel. I never went on another date in high school. Hell, I barely dated at all until I moved to Knoxville for work. Even now, I won't go anywhere near cemeteries, especially the old ones back in the mountains. Sometimes I hear stories from hikers or hunters about something stalking through remote graveyards up in the hills, something that shouldn't exist. I know it's still out there, and I know it remembers the girl who got away. I was 42 when I thought I had the whole ghost tour thing figured out. My name's Chuck Wilson, and I'd been running Haunted Appalachia ghost tours every weekend for about 3 years to help pay the bills. During the week, I worked at the county library in Morgantown, but weekends were when I made my real money. $25 a head to walk folks through local cemeteries and tell them spooky stories. I'm a history buff, always have been, so I knew all the local legends and could spin a good yarn about Confederate soldiers and weeping widows. The thing is, I didn't believe a word of it. Not one bit. But tourists ate it up, especially during Halloween season, and I was good at making them jump with hidden speakers and flashlight tricks. Made enough extra cash to keep my truck running and my mortgage current. The night everything went sideways was a Saturday in late October. Perfect ghost tour weather. Crisp air, clear sky with just enough moon to make the shadows look dramatic. I had 12 people signed up, which was pretty good for that time of year. Mix of couples, some college kids from WVU, and a few older folks who just wanted some harmless fun. They met me at the parking area outside Shadowmere Cemetery around 8:30, all bundled up and ready to get spooked. I started the tour like always, walking them through the newer section first, telling stories about the Civil War soldiers buried there. Nothing too scary at first, just atmospheric stuff about lost loves and unfinished business. I had this whole routine down pat. I'd use a laser pointer to create fake orbs in photos, had little speakers hidden behind certain headstones that I could trigger with a remote. The group was loving it, taking pictures and jumping at all the right moments. "Now we're coming to the most haunted section," I announced dramatically as we approached the oldest part of the cemetery. This was where I always did my big finale. A completely made-up story about how the cemetery had been built over an ancient Native American burial ground. I'd been using this fake legend for years because it always got the biggest reaction. People love that whole disturbed tribal spirits angle. I launched into my usual spiel about angry warriors seeking revenge on trespassers who didn't respect their sacred ground. Pure fiction, but I sold it well. Described how the spirits would sometimes appear to protect their ancestors' remains from desecration. The tourists were hanging on every word, phones out and ready to record any paranormal activity. But as I was talking, something felt different. The air got cold. Not just October cold, but that deep, bone-chilling cold that makes your breath visible even when it shouldn't. The wind picked up too, rustling through the trees in a way that didn't match the weather forecast. I kept going with the story anyway. That was my mistake, I guess. Looking back now, I should have wrapped things up right then, but I was in performer mode, and the crowd was really into it, so I doubled down on the fake legend about warriors rising from their graves to defend their sacred land. That's when we heard the war cries. They came from multiple directions, echoing through the cemetery like they were bouncing off the headstones. Deep, authentic-sounding battle calls that made my blood run cold. These weren't my pre-recorded sound effects. I knew every track I had loaded on my system, and this wasn't any of them. These sounded completely real, like something you'd hear in a documentary about Plains Indian warfare. I looked around, confused, trying to figure out where the sounds were coming from. My tourists were getting excited, thinking it was all part of the show, applauding what they thought were my realistic special effects. A couple of them even started filming, convinced they were about to capture some amazing footage. Then I saw them. Figures started emerging from behind the headstones and trees. At first, they were just shadows, but as they got closer I could make out details that made my stomach drop. Traditional war paint, buckskin clothing, weapons I couldn't even identify. They moved like they belonged there, like the cemetery was their home and we were the intruders. The tourists were still clapping and taking pictures, completely oblivious to the fact that I hadn't hired any actors. I tried to keep my voice steady as I watched more and more figures surround our group. Their eyes seemed to glow with this supernatural fire that definitely wasn't stage makeup. "You mock our sacred ground," one of them spoke, and his voice sounded like thunder rolling through the valley. He was clearly their leader, taller than the others, with scars across his chest and a presence that made me want to run. "Now face our judgment." That's when my tourists finally started to realize this wasn't part of the entertainment. The college kids stopped laughing. The elderly couples moved closer together. Everyone's phones suddenly stopped working at the same time. I tried to explain that it was just entertainment, that I didn't mean any disrespect, but the warrior leader wasn't having it. The spirits, because that's what they were, I was sure of it now, started herding our group toward this pit that had just opened up in the cemetery ground. A pit that definitely hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. "Wait!" I shouted, stepping between the spirits and my customers. Whatever was happening, these people had paid me to keep them safe, and I wasn't about to let them get hurt because of my stupid fake stories. I'm the one telling lies about you. They're just here for entertainment. The lead warrior studied me with these ancient eyes full of anger. Not just anger about tonight, but anger that had been building for years. "You profit from our pain," he said. "Turn our tragedy into your die show." He was right, and I knew it. I'd been making up stories about Native American burial grounds for 3 years, using people's actual beliefs and sacred traditions as props for my tourist trap. I'd never once bothered to research what was actually true about the area, never considered that I might be disrespecting real history and real suffering. "You're absolutely right," I admitted, and I meant it. I've been wrong to make entertainment from people's sacred beliefs. I didn't think about what I was doing. Something changed in the warrior's expression. The anger was still there, but there was approval too, like he hadn't expected me to admit fault so quickly and completely. "Prove your repentance," he demanded. "Stop your lies and tell our true story." I agreed immediately. What else could I do? I promised right there to research the real history of the area and share it respectfully. No more made-up legends for tourist entertainment. The spirits released my group, but before they faded away, the leader pressed his hand to my forehead. It burned like a brand, but when I reached up to touch it, there was nothing there. At least nothing I could see. My tour business collapsed within a month. Word got around that the Halloween tour had been too realistic and potentially dangerous. Several people had panic attacks, and nobody wanted to risk that kind of experience again. Can't say I blamed them, but I kept my promise. Spent the next 6 months researching the real history of Shadowmere Cemetery and the surrounding area. Turns out the cemetery really had been built over a Native American site, not Plains Indians like I'd been describing, but local Cherokee who'd been forced out during removal in the 1830s. Their burial ground had been paved over without any consultation or ceremony, just erased like it never mattered. I started giving free presentations about the authentic indigenous history at the library and local schools. No entertainment value, just education and respect for what really happened. The spirits seemed to approve. I could sense them sometimes, but they felt helpful now instead of threatening. That burning handprint the warrior left on my forehead? I found out later it's visible to certain people, psychics, sensitives, others who've had encounters with the supernatural. It marks me as someone who can see and communicate with spirits, but only those who died unjustly or have unfinished business. I don't run ghost tours anymore, obviously, but I've become something like an unofficial guardian of sacred sites throughout the region. When developers want to build over indigenous burial grounds, or when historical sites are threatened, the spirits let me know, and I do what I can to help. My life has more meaning now than it did when I was just entertaining tourists. I serve truth instead of profit, and I sleep better at night knowing I'm trying to make up for the disrespect I showed for so many years. Sometimes I still visit Shadowmere Cemetery, but now the spirits greet me like a friend. The place feels peaceful when I'm there, not haunted. I guess my real haunting began the night I started taking responsibility for my actions instead of just telling stories for money. I still tell stories about the area, but now they're historically accurate and culturally respectful. It's not as profitable as ghost tours, but it's honest work. And honestly, that means more to me now than any amount of tourist dollars ever did.